After my grandparents died, I inherited $38 million, and the first people who turned against me were my own parents. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Growing up, I always felt invisible in my own home. My name is Emily Carter, and from as far back as I can remember, I learned how to stay quiet. I learned how not to ask for much. My parents were never cruel in loud ways, but their silence was heavy. Decisions were made without me. Praise was rare. Attention always went somewhere else. I became good at surviving on my own, even as a child. The only place I ever felt safe was my grandparents' house. Walter and Evelyn Brooks lived just far enough away that stepping through their front door felt like entering a different world. They listened when I spoke. They noticed when I was sad. They remembered small things about me that no one else cared to ask. When I struggled in school, they helped. When I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, they reminded me that I mattered. They didn't try to change me. They accepted me exactly as I was. As I got older, life stayed hard, but they stayed steady. They never made big promises or dramatic gestures. Their love was quiet and constant. I didn't know then how rare that was. I just knew that when I was with them, I could breathe. When they passed away, my world went numb. Losing them felt like losing the last solid ground under my feet. I moved through the days on autopilot, barely sleeping, barely eating. Everything reminded me of them. Their empty house. Their unanswered phone numbers. The silence was unbearable. A few weeks later, I received a call from a lawyer. I almost ignored it. I wasn't thinking about paperwork or estates. I was still trying to survive the grief. When I finally answered, I expected routine questions, maybe something small to sign. Instead, he asked me to come into his office as soon as possible. Sitting across from him, my hands shaking, I heard words that didn't feel real. My grandparents had left everything to me. Not a portion. Not a shared amount. Everything. Properties, investments, savings. The total came to $38 million. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel excited. I felt stunned and overwhelmed. My first thought wasn't about money. It was about why. Why me? What had they seen that I hadn't? As I left the office, grief and shock tangled together. I had lost the two people who loved me most, and at the same time, my life had changed forever. I just didn't know yet that this inheritance would cost me far more than I ever expected. When I look back now, the reasons feel clear, but growing up, I never questioned them. In our house, my parents, Richard and Linda Carter, had one clear focus, and it wasn't me. Everything revolved around my older brother, Jason. His opinions mattered. His mistakes were forgiven. His dreams were supported without question. I learned early that love in our home came with conditions, and I rarely met them. My parents liked control. They decided what was right for me without asking how I felt. If I disagreed, I was told I was ungrateful. If I struggled, I was told to try harder and stop being sensitive. There was no room for weakness, no space to be heard. I became quiet because it was easier than being dismissed. School was hard for me at first. I wasn't failing, but I wasn't thriving either. I needed guidance, patience, someone to sit with me and explain things slowly. My parents saw it as a burden. That's when my grandparents stepped in without making a show of it. They paid for tutoring. They checked my homework. They encouraged me instead of comparing me to Jason. As I grew older, the gap between how I was treated and how Jason was treated became impossible to ignore. He got new opportunities, new things, constant praise. I got lectures about responsibility and sacrifice. Whenever I spoke up, I was reminded of how much my parents had done for me, as if basic care was something I owed them back with interest. My grandparents never spoke badly about my parents, but they didn't ignore the truth either. They defended me in quiet ways. When my parents pushed too hard, my grandparents stepped between us. When my feelings were brushed aside, they listened. They taught me that kindness wasn't weakness and that setting boundaries didn't make me selfish. They also taught me values that my parents never seemed interested in. Hard work without entitlement. Respect without control. Love without conditions. They showed me how to be careful, thoughtful, and patient. They trusted me with small responsibilities early on, not to test me, but to prepare me. Sometimes my grandmother would look at me for a moment longer than usual, like she was studying something deeper. My grandfather would say things like, "You're stronger than you think," or "Not everyone can carry weight without breaking." At the time, I thought they were just being kind. Now I understand they were watching who I was becoming. They saw how I endured without bitterness. How I kept going even when I felt unseen. They knew I respected what they built because I respected them, not because I wanted anything from them. They knew I wouldn't treat their life's work as a prize or a weapon. While others saw money and control, they saw responsibility. They didn't choose me because I was the easiest. They chose me because they trusted my heart. And even though I didn't know it then, they had been preparing me for that trust all along. The lawyer's office felt cold and quiet, the kind of place where every sound feels too loud. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, still not fully understanding why I had been called in. Papers were spread neatly across the desk, thick folders filled with words and numbers that meant nothing to me yet. The lawyer spoke slowly, carefully, as if he knew my world had already been shaken enough. He explained that my grandparents had planned everything years in advance. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was unclear. Every decision had been written, signed, and reviewed more than once. The will was solid, legally strong, and impossible to challenge. Then he began explaining what had been left to me. Homes. Land. Accounts. Investments that had grown quietly over time. With each sentence, the weight in my chest grew heavier. When he finally said the total amount, my mind went blank. $38 million. The number didn't feel real. It felt like something meant for someone else, not me. I asked him if there had been a mistake. I told him there must be other names listed, other instructions I had missed. He shook his head and showed me the documents. Every page confirmed the same truth. I was the sole beneficiary. No shared control. No conditions tied to other people. It was all intentional. I felt dizzy. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to run out of the room. I wasn't thinking about luxury or freedom. I was thinking about responsibility. I was thinking about how something so big could land on someone who still felt small inside. The lawyer explained that my grandparents had also left personal letters, but those would be given to me later. For now, he focused on making sure I understood the seriousness of what I had inherited. He reminded me that wealth like this often changed relationships, sometimes in painful ways. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. As he spoke, my thoughts drifted to my grandparents' faces. I wondered if they had worried about me when they made these decisions. I wondered if they had known how alone I would feel sitting in that chair. I wished I could ask them why they trusted me with something so heavy. When the meeting ended, I walked outside into the daylight feeling unsteady. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. Grief sat in my chest, now mixed with fear. I hadn't asked for power, money, or control. I hadn't planned for any of this. But whether I felt ready or not, it was mine now. For the first time, I realized that inheritance wasn't just about what you receive. It was about what you are forced to carry. And as I stood there holding a future I didn't choose, I knew my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet understand. Telling my parents felt like something I had to do, even though every part of me wanted to delay it. I kept hoping that, just this once, they would surprise me. I imagined a quiet moment of shared grief, maybe even comfort. I thought losing my grandparents might soften them. I was wrong. At first, Richard and Linda acted shocked. They sat still, listening as I explained what the lawyer had told me. Their faces looked serious, almost respectful. For a brief second, I thought they were processing the loss like I was. Then everything shifted. My father leaned forward and asked how soon the money would be available. Not how I was holding up. Not whether I was okay. Just when it could be accessed. He said the inheritance was family property and that it should come to him, since he was their son. His tone wasn't emotional. It was practical, like he was discussing something that already belonged to him. My mother's reaction was colder. She looked at me as if I had done something wrong. She accused me of influencing my grandparents, of putting ideas in their heads. She said they must have been confused or pressured. According to her, money like that didn't belong with someone like me. It belonged with the parents who knew how to handle it. I tried to explain that I hadn't asked for any of this. I told them I was still grieving, that I was overwhelmed and scared. My words didn't reach them. They were already past that. To them, this wasn't about loss. It was about control. Jason laughed. Not nervously. Not awkwardly. He laughed like it was a joke. He said I didn't deserve that kind of money. He reminded me of every moment I had struggled, every time I had needed help. He spoke as if weakness erased worth. As if survival counted for nothing. I sat there listening, feeling something inside me crack. The warmth I had hoped for never appeared. There was no comfort, no protection, no concern for what I was going through. Just demands, accusations, and judgment. When I didn't immediately agree, their voices grew sharper. My father became angry, saying I was being selfish. My mother said I was tearing the family apart. Jason called me greedy, even though I hadn't asked for a single dollar. I realized then that their grief had limits. It lasted only as long as they thought they were getting something out of it. Once they understood that the money wasn't in their hands, their true feelings surfaced. I left that conversation feeling smaller than ever, but also clearer. Whatever masks they had worn before were gone. I finally saw them as they were, not as the parents I kept hoping they would become. After that conversation, nothing went back to normal. The calls started almost immediately. If I didn't answer, they left messages. If I answered, they talked over me. There was no space to think, no time to breathe. Every day felt like I was being pushed into a corner. My parents began using guilt like a weapon. They reminded me again and again that they had raised me, fed me, given me a home. They spoke as if love was a loan I was now required to repay. My mother said family comes first and that good daughters don't question their parents. My father said I owed them for every sacrifice they claimed to have made. When guilt didn't work, they changed tactics. They rewrote the past in ways that made me feel sick. They talked as if my grandparents had always planned to support them, as if I had somehow stepped in and taken something that wasn't meant for me. They acted like I was a temporary holder, someone who was supposed to hand everything over and disappear quietly. They also began making threats, carefully wrapped in calm voices. My father mentioned lawyers and said things could get complicated if I didn't cooperate. My mother warned me that no one in the family would stand by me if I kept being difficult. She said people would remember who broke the family apart. Each conversation left me drained. I questioned myself constantly. I wondered if I was selfish. I wondered if saying no made me a bad person. The pressure was heavy, and it came from every direction. I had never been good at confrontation, and they knew that. But something started to change inside me. As painful as it was, their words revealed something I had never allowed myself to see. They weren't worried about me. They weren't scared for my future. They were scared of losing control. I noticed how they spoke about me, not to me. I was described as irresponsible, emotional, unfit to handle what I had been given. At the same time, they spoke about the money with confidence, like it already belonged to them. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter making a choice. I was an obstacle. The more they pushed, the clearer it became. Their love had limits, and those limits were tied to what I could give them. When I didn't give them what they wanted, affection turned into pressure, and concern turned into threats. That realization hurt more than the arguments. It forced me to accept a truth I had avoided my whole life. To them, I was never something to protect. I was something to claim. And once I understood that, I knew I could never go back to being quiet just to keep the peace. As the pressure from my parents continued, I started looking through my grandparents' old papers. At first, I was only trying to organize things. Boxes were stacked in quiet rooms, filled with folders, letters, and notes that had been left untouched for years. I didn't expect to find anything that would change how I saw my family. Then I started noticing patterns. There were copies of emails and handwritten notes that didn't make sense at first. Some were short and polite, others tense and carefully worded. Names appeared again and again. My parents. Dates stretched back further than I expected. What began as confusion slowly turned into something heavier. The documents showed that my parents had been asking for money long before my grandparents passed away. Not once or twice, but repeatedly. There were requests for loans that were never repaid, demands disguised as advice, and arguments about how finances should be handled. In several letters, my grandparents had written about feeling pressured and cornered. I also found notes from conversations my grandparents had written down for their own records. They described phone calls where my parents questioned their decisions, criticized their spending, and suggested they were no longer capable of managing their own affairs. Reading those words made my stomach tighten. The tone wasn't caring. It was controlling. What hurt most was realizing how quietly my grandparents had carried this burden. They hadn't told me. They hadn't caused drama. They had simply observed and protected themselves the best way they could. In one letter, my grandmother wrote that she was worried about what would happen to everything they had built if it fell into the wrong hands. She wrote about wanting to make sure their life's work wasn't used to hurt others or create more greed. My grandfather had added a note agreeing that trust mattered more than blood. That was when I understood the truth. This inheritance wasn't about rewarding me. It was about stopping them. My grandparents hadn't chosen me because they loved me more than anyone else. They chose me because they knew I wouldn't abuse what they left behind. They saw what I hadn't been allowed to see yet. They saw entitlement where others saw family. They saw risk where others saw opportunity. And they knew that leaving the money to my parents would only deepen the harm. The realization cut deep. The people I had been pressured to protect were the same people my grandparents had been protecting themselves from. The choice they made wasn't sudden or emotional. It was careful and necessary. For the first time, the weight I was carrying made sense. This wasn't a gift meant to make my life easier. It was a shield meant to keep something worse from happening. And by trusting me with it, my grandparents had asked me to do something hard but important, to stand firm where they no longer could. The next time we met, I already knew what I was going to say. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I had spent enough nights questioning myself. I had read enough, learned enough, and felt enough pressure to understand that staying silent was no longer an option. We sat in the same room where so many arguments had ended with me backing down. This time was different. My parents spoke first, repeating the same demands, the same claims about what they deserved. They talked as if the decision was still up for debate. When there was a pause, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but steady. I told them I wasn't giving them any money. Not now. Not later. Not ever. I didn't explain myself in detail. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my character. I simply stated the truth. The room went silent for a moment. Then everything exploded. My father stood up, his face red with anger. He called me selfish and said I had forgotten where I came from. He accused me of betraying my own blood. My mother began crying, but her tears quickly turned into insults. She said I was ungrateful, that I had ruined the family, that I would regret this for the rest of my life. Jason didn't even pretend to be hurt. He looked at me with open disgust and said he wanted nothing to do with me anymore. He told me to never contact him again. In that moment, I understood how thin our connection had always been. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I listened until there was nothing left to say. My heart was racing, and my body felt weak, but inside, something felt solid for the first time. When they realized I wasn't changing my mind, the insults became louder, more desperate. They tried one last time to make me feel small. It didn't work. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. As I stepped outside, my legs nearly gave out. I sat in my car for a long time, breathing through the shaking. I was terrified. I was hurt. But underneath it all, there was a feeling I had never known before. Relief. I had finally chosen myself. I had finally said no. And even though I was walking away alone, I knew I wasn't walking away weak anymore. After I walked away, they didn't stop. If anything, they became more determined. Letters arrived filled with official language meant to scare me. My father talked about courts and consequences, as if saying the words enough times would make me give in. Nothing ever followed through, but the intention was clear. They wanted me afraid. At the same time, the stories started spreading. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my character. I heard that I was being called cold, greedy, and heartless. Some said I had turned my back on my family for money. Others claimed I had planned everything from the beginning. No one asked me for my side. They had already decided who I was. Family gatherings stopped including me. Invitations disappeared. Phone calls went unanswered. I felt the distance growing, not just between me and my parents, but between me and everyone connected to them. The isolation was heavy. There were days when the silence hurt more than the arguments ever did. I questioned myself again. Late at night, doubt crept in. I wondered if standing firm was worth losing so many people at once. I wondered if I was stronger than I thought, or just stubborn. In those moments, I remembered my grandparents. I remembered the lessons they taught me without lectures or pressure. They taught me that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. They taught me that peace often comes at a cost. And they taught me that love should never require you to disappear. I focused on staying calm and grounded. I handled everything carefully, quietly, and with patience. I didn't respond to insults. I didn't chase approval. I kept my life simple and steady, even when everything around me felt uncertain. Slowly, I stopped expecting understanding from people who had never tried to understand me before. I stopped hoping my parents would suddenly see me differently. Their love had always depended on what I could give them. Now that I had nothing they could take, that love vanished. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. I no longer had to perform or explain myself. I didn't have to earn care that was never truly offered. Standing alone was hard, but it was honest. And for the first time, I wasn't living in fear of losing approval. I had already lost it. What I gained instead was clarity, and with it, the strength to keep moving forward without looking back. Time passed, and with it came changes I couldn't control and didn't try to. I stayed focused on building a quiet, stable life. I handled things carefully, making choices slowly and with intention. I didn't rush into anything or try to prove a point. I just wanted peace. While I moved forward, cracks began to appear in the lives of the people who had pushed me the hardest. I didn't hear the details right away, but bits of truth reached me over time. Poor decisions, unpaid debts, broken promises. The same sense of entitlement that had driven them toward my grandparents' money now began working against them. Arguments spread beyond just me. Old friendships weakened. Family relationships grew tense. The control they once held over others started slipping away. Without someone else to blame or take from, the problems became impossible to hide. I felt no joy in hearing any of it. There was no satisfaction. Only a quiet understanding that actions eventually catch up to everyone. I didn't celebrate their struggles. I didn't step in to fix them either. I had learned that helping someone who refuses to change only keeps the cycle alive. Instead, I focused on honoring what had been trusted to me. I took care of the things my grandparents had worked for, not as trophies, but as responsibilities. I made sure decisions were thoughtful and respectful. Every choice was guided by the values they had lived by. I also rebuilt myself. I allowed space for healing. I surrounded myself with calm, not chaos. Slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt before: steady confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need approval. Independence became my reward. I could wake up without fear of judgment. I could make decisions without pressure. I could breathe without waiting for permission. The distance between me and my parents grew wider, but it no longer hurt the same way. What once felt like loss now felt like closure. I understood that peace didn't come from winning or watching others fall. It came from walking away from harm and choosing a different path. By staying grounded and true to myself, I found something far more valuable than revenge. I found dignity. And that was something no one could ever take from me. After everything had settled, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I had really inherited. It wasn't just money or property. It wasn't the houses or the accounts or the investments. Those things were important, of course, but the true inheritance was something deeper. It was the lessons my grandparents had taught me. It was the understanding of my own worth. It was the knowledge that I could set boundaries and protect myself without guilt. It was freedom, the kind of freedom that comes when you no longer live to satisfy someone else's expectations. One quiet morning, I went to visit my grandparents' graves. The air was still, the kind of calm that lets you think without interruption. I knelt down, feeling the rough stone under my hands, and I thanked them. I thanked them for seeing me when no one else did. For trusting me even when I didn't understand why. For preparing me to carry something heavy, not just the inheritance, but the strength to stand alone if I ever had to. As I stood there, I realized how much had changed. My parents may have lost millions, but what they lost went far beyond money. They lost the person I had become. They lost the respect and trust that had once existed in even the smallest corners of our family. They lost the chance to be loved unconditionally because their own choices had made that impossible. And I didn't feel satisfaction or gloating. I felt relief and peace. I felt alive in a way I never had before. I thought about Jason too. He had turned his back on me, but it no longer mattered. I understood that no one who had treated me as a means to an end could ever take away what my grandparents had built into me. The lessons, the confidence, the sense of worth, those things were mine forever. And for the first time, I saw my inheritance as more than protection. It was a gift of clarity. It showed me who I could be without fear, without manipulation, without anyone trying to own me. Walking away from the cemetery, I felt lighter. Every step reminded me that I didn't owe anyone my obedience or my loyalty when it came at the cost of my dignity. The real victory wasn't in proving anyone wrong. The real victory was in refusing to be owned, refusing to be silenced, and refusing to compromise my peace. Sometimes the strongest revenge doesn't come from retaliation or anger. Sometimes it comes from choosing yourself, from holding your boundaries, and from living a life free from the control of those who never truly cared. I carried that truth with me, and it was more powerful than anything else I had ever been given. That was the legacy my grandparents left me, and I would honor it for the rest of my life.